have a standard that you use in your office every time.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out in the podcast chair once again, talking about a very interesting topic today and a very interesting guest. I want to first remind you that we are sponsored by three great companies. Of course, Working RE. Working RE is the place that I go to get all kinds of information about what's going on in the world, including this very topic, which has been brought up before in their magazine. Of course, check them out. Go to workingre.com. Workingre.com. Data Master, saving appraisers time, saving appraisers money. And folks, we're talking a lot. We're talking a lot of time being saved by using this great program called Data Master. Check them out. Go to datamasterusa.com, datamasterusa.com. And finally, we're sponsored by Alamode. Alamode software is the leader in the appraisal reporting software in the world. Check them out. Go to alamode.com or call them at 800-ALAMODE. Well, I want to welcome back to the program a good friend of mine, Mr. Hal Humphrey. He is a lifetime learner and educator. He is a practicing certified fraud examiner and professional investigator. Hal is a CDEI certified instructor through IDECC. He writes lectures and he walks. He is a certified general real estate appraiser in the state of Tennessee. Hal, welcome back to the program, man. What does this mean that he walks? I walk.
You know, there's a long story, but the short story is my wife and I have had a long practice of walking. We walk long distances.
Nice. Give me an idea. What's a long distance for Hal?
I walk every day, usually a couple miles a day, and then on the weekends we'll walk 4 or 5 miles.
Nice.
We have over the years walked across Spain twice from France to the ocean, about 700 kilometers.
Wow. Okay. All right. I'm impressed.
On a route called the Camino de Santiago, which is a pilgrimage to the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela.
Yeah.
We walk a lot. Way too much, probably.
That is super. Well, that's why you're so fit and trim, my friend. So this guy, of course, is not only just a smart dude, but he's an active real estate appraiser on the ground, if you will. He's also active in my Nashville mastermind team and constantly working on improving his business. Now, Hal reached out to me a couple of weeks ago with a question that I thought, at first I thought, well, that's kind of a weird question. But the more I thought about it, I thought that is really a good question. And Hal, what was the question? What did you reach out with me? I mean, maybe not the specific question, but what was the topic you reached out to me on here a couple of days ago?
Why do we measure houses?
And I think most listeners would say, Hal, because that's what an appraiser does.
Yes. I mean, of course. I grew up, when people ask me how I got into the business, my father was a real estate appraiser. I grew up measuring houses. That's
sure
what we do. Most of our friends, and I'm sure you're the same way, they'll say, oh, he's out appraising a house. And that means we're out measuring and taking pictures and doing that thing. That's not actually the appraisal. That's a part of the process.
That's data gathering, right?
It is. It's data gathering. But the thing about it is, I don't know why we insist on measuring houses.
Okay, let me play the devil's advocate here for just a little bit. And I know where you're digging. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. And it's more than just, well, Hal, that's because, that's what we do. It's because we need to gather the most relevant information on the property, right? Most of our scope of works indicate, appraising the property, the house, and we don't want to appraise a 1,500 square foot house if it's really 1,200 square feet, right? So I think it's important that we, boots on the ground. I think a lot of appraisers would argue that's the best information because we're right there. Why not?
I hear that. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. I've done a lot of review work for the state of Tennessee over the years. And I have never once really questioned an appraiser's measurement of the house. But one of the things I do make note of is a lot of times appraisers will say, I measured this house to Ansi Standards. And when I talk to the appraiser, they've never taken an Ansi Standards course. They really don't understand what ANSI is,
right?
And they don't know what the standards are.
Right.
And then they say, if you say I've done this square footage calculation based on ANSI standards, they don't report according to ANSI standards. ANSI requires some very specific reporting to meet the standard.
Right.
And what Hamp Thomas says, and Hamp teaches, Appraiser Elearning is our education business here in Nashville. I run with Jim McLeod. Hamp Thomas is one of our instructors, and he teaches an Ansi course. Super good guy. And the course is fantastic. But he points out, if you're going to say, I measured a house to Ansi Standards requires that you meet all of the standards, including the reporting standard. And most appraisers that say they measure to Ansi Standards don't report to Ansi Standards.
Got it.
A lawyer would pick up on that right away and say, you used Ansi Standards. Why didn't you report it to Ansi Standards? If you didn't report it to Ansi Standards, you didn't follow the standards. Therefore, you didn't measure it according to Ansi Standards.
Exactly. By the way, just not to derail you, Hal, but I could be wrong, but I think I'm right on this. Ansi Standard. So a lot of appraisers say they measured Ansi Standard, but Ansi Standard is to the nearest 1/10 of a foot, and I guarantee most appraisers, myself included in that, are not measuring to the nearest 1/10 of a foot.
No, and the argument for that practice of measuring to the nearest half foot or whatever it is you choose is, number one, I had a discussion with a guy about, he said, well, I just don't think the laser measure is accurate. And I said, well, is your tape measure accurate? He said, I know it's accurate. So I stretched the tape across this long wall in this lecture hall and showed the bow and the tape. Like, it's not accurate. Number one. Number two, how long have you had your fiberglass tape? After 5 years, that thing is stretched out because you sit there tugging on it every time. The bottom line is USPAP doesn't require appraisers to measure. Not only does USPAP not require appraisers to measure, USPAP has nothing to say about measuring.
Right.
At all.
Right. So why do we do it? That is obviously, when you say someone's out appraising a house, if somebody came back from an inspection and said, well, I walked through the house, I didn't bother measuring it. I just didn't have time or didn't feel it was pertinent. We would think, what? You missed out on a big portion of the appraisal.
Yeah, there's no requirement in USPAP to measure anything. Now, we have to describe the property, and we have to describe it as accurately as possible. And going back to your point of, if I go out and measure the house and do the calculations, I can describe the property as such, right?
Sure.
Here's where the rub comes in. I have very rarely gone out and measured a home, or any building for that matter. And I appraised commercial real estate for 25 years.
Okay.
Across the Southeast, sometimes as far as, Ogden, Utah, working for a client here in Nashville. And I never once measured a building. I got architectural plans.
Yeah.
I got as-built surveys, and I used those. I relied on those measurements because those people measure to a standard that is far and above what I could do with a tape measure or a laser measure.
Got it.
But if I go out and measure a house, it's very rare that my measurement comes out exactly the same as what's listed on the MLS.
Sure.
And it's very rare that those two numbers match what's on the tax assessor's records.
Right.
So you've got three separate indications of the home's size, right? In Tennessee, I know the tax assessors do not go out and measure homes. They use aerial pictometry and they measure the thing using the measure tool on their map program. And that's pretty close. And they don't have to be right. They just have to be fair.
Right. Okay.
The MLS, I would argue MLS is probably the best source to use for square footage.
Okay. So let me challenge you on that, if you don't mind. So if someone's buying a house, a buyer comes in and they're basing that on the reported MLS GLA. And you and I both know, Hal, we know enough about real estate to know that most buyers are not going to pull out a tape and measure it themselves. They're going to trust whatever that realtor told them. This is a 1,500 square foot home. This is a 2,500 square foot home. They're just going to accept it at face value. And by the way, I know the answer to this before I ask it, but I'd like it to hear from your mouth instead of mine. Isn't it our job to tell them that they're wrong?
No, it's not our job to tell them they're wrong. Our job as real estate appraisers is to help our client, usually for most residential boots on the ground appraisers, our clients are usually lenders, help our client understand what the value of the property is. Mm-hmm. That's our job.
But our job plays into that.
Of course it does, but it's not the only part of it. And I'm going to make the argument that if MLS says it's 1,052 square feet and tax assessor says it's 1,048 square feet, and I come with 1,050 square feet,
okay, right.
That's the same value.
I get it. But there are, and I've told the story here before, where I had a situation years ago where I physically took the realtor out to the property with me because the property was 300 square feet less than what he had listed on the MLS. It was a purchase. They were doing it based, and by the way, the value was there, if you will. The value met the contract price with the higher square footage. Let's call it 1,500, but it did not at 1,200. And I took him out here, physically walked around the property with him and showed him that it was a 1,200 square foot home. And I said, 1,200 square foot comps don't sell for the same as what the 1,500 square foot comps sell for. And he said, I don't care. They're buying this at 1,500 square feet. So what about that argument?
I mean, I think as an appraiser, if you've, and again, I'm not saying don't measure houses. I'm just asking, why do we do it? And that's a valid reason as to why you might want to measure a house. Here's the thing. If I come up with a 300, 500 square foot discrepancy, I might suggest that, number one, I'm going to double check it.
Sure. Oh, I triple checked.
I may have messed up, right?
Sure.
Number two, if I still come up with that difference, I'm going to suggest that they have someone that knows how to measure a house that can certify that measurement. So an architect or a surveyor come out, do an as-built survey showing the perimeter of the house, just to get that onus off of my shoulders.
Right.
Because I don't want to be the one making the argument that to the real estate agent, you're being fraudulent.
Right. Put that onus on someone else.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and the bottom line is in this situation, and you know, I'll out him. His name was Chuck. He's long since retired. But Chuck, my dear friend, the realtor here, it was very obvious to both of us when I walked around the property. First, he challenged my laser, and then I proved to him that a laser is actually very accurate. But then he challenged my measurements, and then in the end, you know, he had to just challenge the fact that, hey, they're buying this property based on, you know, what we reported, and what we reported was, and when I say we, I mean the MLS reported was 1,500. Well, guess where they got that from? The county records. He didn't measure it. He never had walked around that property with a tape measure or a laser or anything else. So here's the question, Hal. This leads to the bigger question of, let's say that we're damn good at measuring, right? Let's say that we're the best in the West. You know, we've read Hamp's book. We've gone through it. We're excellent. We've gone through the certification course that I think you can get through Appraiser Elearning. That's still available, right, Hal?
It is.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say we've gone through that and we're just excellent at measuring, and we know for a fact, you know, that this property is a certain square footage. Well, here's the problem, Hal. We're comparing that to what? We're comparing that to comps that I guarantee we haven't measured. Maybe one, maybe we, you know, did the personal appraisal on one of the 6 that we use in the report. So do we have a discrepancy here where we know very well what a square footage is on the subject, but we don't necessarily on the comps that we're comparing it to?
I would argue that we almost never, unless we happen to have appraised the comparable, we're trusting the MLS on that number. Exactly. So this gets to a couple of things. You know, USPAP doesn't say anything. Fannie Mae Selling Guide is vague at best. I think Fannie Mae Selling Guide says the appraiser should use the exterior dimensions per floor to calculate above grade gross living area for a property. It doesn't say who measures it. Doesn't say where those measurements come from. Doesn't say you have to measure them. It says use the exterior dimensions.
Right.
HUD says in their 4000.1, square foot gross living area is calculated by measuring the outside perimeter of the house. Okay, so it says measuring the outside perimeter of the house. I think HUD and FHA would say that means you, appraiser, are required under FHA, you know, guidelines to measure the house.
I would think
they don't say that explicitly.
They don't say who. They don't say who, in other words.
Right. They don't say who should measure it. But in the same requirement, they come back with the appraiser should use the same measurement techniques for the subject and comparable sales and report the building dimensions in a consistent manner.
Yeah.
So unless you're going out and measuring each one of the comparables, and you know, the number of times I've had people chase me off for just taking a picture from the road of a house.
Right.
Try walking up and measuring the house.
I can imagine.
Say, hey man, you mind if I measure your house? They're not gonna come into that. So
just wear all black. Don't ask.
So if you're using the MLS as your standard for your square footage, then the argument is solid that you should use the same standard for your subject.
Yep.
And the other thing is, USPAP says, and USPAP does say, we as appraisers, our reports should reflect the actions of the participants in the market. And if the participants in the market are saying this house is 1,052 square feet, the buyer and seller both agree, the tax assessor number is the same, whether anybody measured or not, if that's what the market is doing, do we not have a responsibility to reflect the actions of the market participants?
Well, let me give you a true life example that happened to me 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I had pulled comps on a condo based on the MLS, and the MLS said it was 1,450 square feet, 1450. Okay. So I pulled comps a little bit bigger, pulled comps a little bit smaller, but best of all, I chose the next door neighbor that the house, it was a twin home, a townhome, if you will. And I chose the next door neighbor, the one it was actually attached to, which is a model match as far as square footage goes, right? The subject is selling for 1,450 square feet. And the next door neighbor had just sold, well, it'd been a few months, but had just sold for 1,450 square feet, right? Pretty good comp. I went out, I measured the property, and I came up all day long, and I checked myself and double checked myself at 1,380. Now, is that a huge difference? No, we're still within 100 square feet, but it is a difference. So now on my report, it says 1380 for the subject and 1450 for comp one, and yet they're right next to each other, and you can see the picture that they're the same damn house, just a mirror image of each other, right? So someone is buying that property based on 1,450 square feet. That is the participant that you're talking about in the marketplace, and yet I'm reporting that no, it's actually less square footage. I'm sure of it. And by the way, the one next door is a little bit bigger, even though it's not really.
Right. Well, I mean, I had a complaint from a client saying that I had not bracketed the subject with regard to square footage. Two sales in the same development, model matches. They are the exact same building. Literally, like you take the floor plan, you flip it over, and you got the adjoining building. One of them was right next door to the subject property. MLS has it at 1380. I measured 1372. That's 8 square feet difference. I did not bracket, but it's the same house.
It's the same house, yeah.
Anyway. I don't know what the answer is. I do think that if to my mind, if I can put the onus on someone else, I would rather do that. So, of course, if you measure the house and you come up 50 square feet different or 100 square feet different than the tax assessor and the MLS, you should discuss that. Put it in a report. Tax assessor says this, MLS says this, I measured this. But then you as an appraiser have the ability to say, the market accepts this one, be it MLS or tax assessor or my measurements. But if the market accepts MLS and my measurement differs from that, that's okay. You can, as an appraiser, say, I measured it, I came up with this. MLS says this, the market is using this, I'm going to rely on this square footage for my analysis. But my measurement of the house is this.
We're talking with Hal Humphreys. He is with Appraiser Elearning and an appraiser out of Nashville, Tennessee. When we get back, Hal, I want to talk about liabilities. What type of liabilities? How are we sticking our necks out by measuring? And not by not measuring, but by measuring. I want to pause here first and remind you that we're sponsored by 3 great companies. One of them, of course, being Alamode. Alamode is where I'm at on a daily basis because it's my report writing software of choice. Why? Because they are the leader, folks. Speaking of on-site measurements, I tell you, Alamode is the leader out there. I am out there constantly with mobile and sketching on my mobile. It's a great, easy program to learn. All kinds of tools within that. And that's just one of the things that Alamode offers. Check them out. Go to alamode.com or 800-ALAMODE. We're sponsored by Datamaster, saving appraisers time. Now, I've talked to you on this program frequently about the fact that I have 5 different MLSs. We actually are just adding a 6th one today. I'm in the process of filling out the paperwork for the 6th one. And guess what? The first thing I checked on was, is this a Datamaster MLS? Unfortunately, because it's rural Wyoming, it is not. And but the ones that work with my systems are absolutely amazing, folks. If they are in your system, and by the way, they are in most of the MLS systems across the nation, check them out. Go to datamasterusa.com. Find out if they're in your area. If they are, what are you waiting for? Amazing tools, amazing people, amazing company. Datamasterusa.com. Again, datamasterusa.com. And finally, we're sponsored, of course, by Working RE Magazine on a pretty regular basis, folks. To my email inbox, I get an email from Working RE. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, that's just a pain, Dustin. I don't need that kind of stuff. Well, if it's pertinent to your career of choice, would you feel differently? Now, are there some occasional advertisements that come through? Yeah, once in a while. But I'm telling you, folks, the majority of the information that comes across from Working RE is stuff that I want to pause and read and go through. I had one just yesterday. I saved it till later in the day because I knew I'd have more time, and it was a great read. WorkingRE.com is where you sign up for their free new e-newsletter. Again, it's WorkingRE.com. All right, folks, welcome back to the program. I'm with Hal Humphreys. He's with Appraiser Elearning. What are you guys doing over at Elearning these days, Hal?
We have a lot of things going on. We have been working with Candy Cook out of Texas on some crossover education for appraisers and real estate agents. Some of those courses are specifically for Texas, but some of them are germane to people across the country. We had a discussion about whether or not to co-brand Appraiser Elearning and Agent Elearning at Evaluation Expo, and we decided that appraisers, generally speaking, aren't huge fans of agents, so we wouldn't co-brand. But
Smart. I endorse that decision.
But the agents have equal amounts of animus towards appraisers right now. We come in under the contract price so many times, and there are ways to fix that. Have nothing to do with square footage. But yeah, we've got a lot of fun things going on. Brian is working on a couple of new courses. We've got some really good kind of video-rich courses with Brian on inspecting or the Appraiser's Guide to Home Observations, because he doesn't like to say inspection. So we've got some really fun things coming down the pike, and
Good.
I'm excited about those.
Great company, folks. Check them out. Appraiser Elearning. You can find them online. Just Google it. Easy to find. All right, Hal, we've got a couple of minutes left. I want to ask you just a couple quick questions. I want to tee up this next question by repeating again, going back to your bio. One of the things you do is you are a PI, a private investigator. So I know you spend a lot of time in the courts, in the law side of things. And so again, I know this kind of a crossover. It's not bringing that necessarily into this, but you understand liability. You understand that some of the things that we do may seem like they're going to benefit us, and sometimes they come back to, I call it rope to hang ourselves with, right? So my question, Hal, very simply, is when we as appraisers sketch a property, is that an asset or is that a liability?
It is evidence.
Okay, explain.
Anything you put on, in the world of an investigator, we talk about memorializing. If you memorialize something, it's on paper, it is there, it becomes part of the record somewhere. Once a thing is on paper, it somehow becomes more real. So a lot of conversations with investigators and attorneys will be mouth to ear, just having conversation about theories of the case and those kind of things, just to make sure that we don't memorialize anything until we're ready to.
Got it.
So as appraisers, we are memorializing pretty much everything on a daily basis, right? But anything you memorialize can be considered evidence down the road. So the liability of including your measurements and your sketches in an appraisal report can be significant. Now, a lot of our clients require that, expect it. Most of our peers do it. And that's one of the other things that USPAP leans on is kind of what do your peers do?
Got it.
Which I think is the strongest argument for going out and measuring the houses. The thing that got me thinking about the question of measure, don't measure houses is, I've appraised commercial properties, upwards of $50 million properties, and never once measured a thing. You appraise a home in McEwen, Tennessee, that's a $180,000 home, and you measure it, and as well as I do, the liability for residential appraisers is far greater than the $500 fee you get,
right,
or the
exactly.
$600 fee you get.
Yeah.
So if you're going to measure homes, the suggestion I make when I teach about this is, and I've taught the Ansi Standards course. I'm familiar with Ansi Standards. I have specifically not gotten certified as a home measurement specialist because I don't want to be certified as a home measurement specialist. But the thing I tell people is have a standard that you use in your office every time. I don't care what it is. Unless you're in Kentucky where they require you to use Ansi Standards, in which case you need to learn the standard.
Right.
But have a standard that you use. Dustin, you talk about when you measure to the nearest half a foot. That's your standard. Right. If you do that every time, you can then say, this is our policy, our procedure, this is how we do it.
And here's why.
And here's why. And you can stand up in court and you do it that same way every time.
Right.
Have a standard that you use. Don't measure one house one way and another house another way and another house another way, because that can get you in trouble.
Yep.
And if you do become certified as a home measurement specialist through Ansi, pay real close attention to the Ansi reporting requirements and do that in your report in an addendum. And just it's easy. It takes a couple extra minutes, but report it the way Ansi requires you to report it. Also report it the way FHA requires you to report it, and Fannie Mae requires you to report it. You know what I'm saying? Each one of those, everybody has a different way they require things to be articulated and reported, but make sure you do that right. The liability is if you mess up and it's on paper. For instance, years ago, I measured a house that, I got a call from the client. They said, hey, we think you've got it wrong. And I'm like, I can go back out and measure it if you can get me back out to see it. They were kind enough to allow me to address the issue and fix it. And lucky for me, it didn't have any impact on value. But I had literally missed the back wall measurement. I did the stupid speedster thing that a lot of us do. You've got a square building, you measure the side, the front, the side, and you just tap the button on the back.
Yep. Make it.
Had I measured the back, I would realize that I had miscalculated on the front because of a porch and some adding and subtracting. Once you put that on paper, it's hard to undo that.
Yep.
So if you're going to put sketches and measurements and square footage in your report, get as close as you can to accurate, have a standard. And then the last thing is, if your number is different from MLS and different from tax assessor's numbers, talk about that. Explain the difference. And again, this takes a couple of minutes, but you just say tax assessor says X, MLS says Y, I say Z, and then pick the one you want to use and have a reason for using it. If you're 50 square feet different, I would suggest you've measured the house, you've included the sketch that you drew. Maybe use MLS in that case. If everybody's agreeing that's the number, use it, and then articulate. I came. But I think liability terrifies me as an appraiser, and especially since getting back into the residential side of things. We have a mutual friend who has a complaint against her for alleged racial bias. I know you and I both know several people around the country who are facing complaints of racial bias right now. That kind of a complaint, that kind of an allegation can quickly add up financially. So the biggest key that I would say as far as liability goes is make sure you have real good errors and omissions insurance. I know a lot of appraisers that have broker's licenses will get through their MLS system a rider for appraisal activity. Be careful about that, because those a lot of times don't cover as much stuff as a standalone appraiser liability policy would.
Well, Hal, we're probably not going to change the world today, but I love these types of questions simply because it allows us to think outside the box. Next time I'm out measuring a house, which will probably be tomorrow, I'm probably going to be saying, why am I doing this? Hal Humphreys, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Dustin. Good to talk to you.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.